Hey guys, this video is going to be a quick tip on how to ensure that you win your offlane every single time. What you can do as a safe laner to try to prevent this from happening, and also some common mistakes that I've seen my viewers making in their replays when I've analyzed them when they are trying to emulate this trick. Let's go ahead and get started.
Banana slam jam.
So before we get started, I want to preface this video with exactly the basis of what makes this so good. So the lane equilibrium in the side lanes is incredibly important. The closer the lane meets to your tower, the better. That's because the chase distance of the opponent team is less, you're getting the armor and HP regen of your own tower, and it also allows you to be more aggressive because the chase distance towards their tower is higher. So basically, the entire goal of the laning stage is for the safe laners to try to keep the lane as close to their tower as possible, and for the off laners to try to get the lane as close to their tower as possible. But the creeps, by default, meet pretty damn close to the safe lane tower. So what that means is as an offlaner, we need to change that dynamic. We need to do something to make that happen. And this is exactly what this video is all about. So here the creep waves are about to meet for the first time. And I think what's really important to note is what we're going to do right off the bat. And that is going to be to pull the aggro of these creeps to our range creep. This is ultra important because the range creep is responsible for keeping the lane near the opponent's tower. I would like to note that the opponent also did the same thing, and I actually think that's a big mistake. Because if they pull it to their own range creep, it's going to make it even easier for me to pull it to mine. If I'm the carry, I like to let the opponent off lane pull the aggro to their range, secure their range, and then proceed to pull the creeps to my own. But what you're going to see here is we both do this, which I think is always going to favor the offlaner. We're going to get our range creep killed off, and then we're going to make sure that these three creeps chase after us. Once we get these three creeps on top of us, we are left with a situation where all the melee creeps left on each wave are now separated. So fortunately for us, their melee creep has walked into tower. The entire mini game as an offlaner that you are trying to win is keeping these three creeps alive longer than these creeps. And so what we're going to do is hover them outside of tower range. It is very important to note that the area that you hold them in has to allow your range creep to leave tower range. So you can check that tower range by holding Alt, by going to the settings, options, holding Alt shows tower attack range. And once the range creep is held outside of tower, you're then going to aggro these three creeps onto your range creep, like so. And that's going to get your range creep denied, while since we have more creeps alive than they do, then their creep wave is going to start advancing faster than ours, right? So what you're going to see here is that we get the range creep denied, no heroes in XP range, so that's like a double deny, and their lane is now going to be walking forward to ours. And you can even do little neat aggro tricks by pulling the creeps over here to make it even better. And basically what's going to happen because of this is that the lane is going to sit in front of our tower for the majority of the remainder of the laning phase. And the only thing the opponent can do to counter this is to pull the small camp. It's really important to note that if you're the 4th position hero, you should try to prevent this camp from spawning in the first place. If they did not have a pull camp here, this lane would permanently be in front of my tower. And because it was only a single pull, I'm not going to react to it, and I'm just going to keep the lane in front of my tower. If this was a stacked camp, I would try to clear these creeps such that I could go contest, because a stacked camp will kill the entire wave. So what you're seeing here is basically a battle to keep the lane in front of the tower. And I have been freely farming with no threat for the first 2.5 minutes because of this move. And as long as that pull never happened, it would have remained just that way. This is so important to establishing dominance in the offlane. If you're able to pull this off, I promise you, you will win the early stages of the lane Absolutely no question. So if you get off to such an early lead in the off lane, it will drastically impact the results of who hits level 6 first, who gets those 1 or 2 small items up first in the lane, and all these things turn into a snowballing advantage. The whole idea is that the closer the lane is to your tower, the better the trades will constantly be. You will slowly but surely win out in the lane. So when we fast forward to 6 minutes in, if we look at the net worths, even though he has about the same CS as I do when we look at that, I've been yoinking him, prioritizing that over CS. So I am a whole 400 net worth ahead of him. And I've also bought literally no regen worth of items. So all my items are super efficient. I'm allowed to go for a more greedier build. And it's just the fact that my lane is absolutely secured due to that one move early. So in our first example of one of my viewers making the mistake of not doing this in the first place, we want to show you what happens. So especially important against ranged right clickers that are kind of scared of you in the early game. Clinkz being a perfect example, Drow, any heroes of the like. If the lane is near their tower, they're going to feel perfectly safe to harass you. So he doesn't actually aggro at any point, so the lane is going to stay here. And he's just going to get constantly right-clicked by Clinkz. In this lane, with a stun from Monkey King as well as the hammer from Dawn, if the lane's up here, Clinkz is just not going to be allowed to do this. So now the lane is going to be hopefully pushing into him if he were to aggro at any point. But when the lane's this far out, the last thing you want to do is to use spells to trade here. We want to get the lane where we want it and then use spells to trade more efficiently. Every time you cast a spell here, generally it's going to be bad or at least less efficient compared to a spell being cast back here. So in this particular lane, the Dawn actually managed to get the lane back to his tower because the Monkey King pulled the hard camp. So this is another way to get this done, but now we have to be wary of another common mistake happening here. And what that is that the opponent has more creeps than us. They have way more creeps than us. And even though the lane's in front of our tower, if they have way too many creeps, then we're going to have to play super passively. So we want to have the lane in front of our tower, and we want it to be slightly pushing into us, but we don't want it to be so much that the opponent can get away with pulling the hard camp, for instance, like they did just now, because you have to play scared. And we also don't want the lane to be pushing into our tower, because at any point that it pushes into our tower, it is likely going to slingshot back towards the opponent team. So that's going to prevent us from keeping in front of our tower in the first place. So when this is happening, we are noting that we want to employ our understanding of stabilizing the creep equilibrium that I talk about in my fundamental videos and make sure that the lane is as even as possible right here. So when the opponent has more creeps than us, we need to be hitting these creeps, right? We need to just be giving them casual hits on the enemy creeps to make sure there's not too many. As what's going to happen here is he's going to drag to his range like I showed, but since the opponent already has more creeps than he does, suddenly there's 6 enemy creeps instead of having 3 or 4, right? And that's going to cost him where he has to keep letting it go into his tower because he can't keep it outside of his tower range without taking too much damage from either the Clinkz or the creeps. And that's going to put the lane right back in favor of the opponent in terms of where the lane equilibrium rests. So these are 2 common mistakes that I've seen in many of my replay analysis, and let's go on to talk about a few more. So this next example is a fantastic example because this is a player that is clearly trying to use this method but is missing some of the key functionalities. So when you saw in the Bounty Hunter example, when I drew the creep aggro initially, I gave up the enemy range creep. Like I let them get that deny because Bounty Hunter has no way, level 1, of securing that range creep without ruining this entire thing that we're doing here, right? So that's something, that's a price, a small price that I have to pay as Bounty Hunter to get the lane back here. But Legion, on the other hand, absolutely has a way to secure this range creep, right? So he's gonna do what I wanted him to do where he aggroes the creeps to his range. Great, first step. Now, though, we can't just forget about the opponent range. If we pull up his player view, he's not really going to notice it, right? He doesn't even look at it. You need to be paying attention to when this range creep's going to die, because every time you draw aggro to your range, this is exactly what's going to happen, right? So he could have easily used overwhelming odds to secure this range creep. And that's something that you should always consider when doing this if your hero has any way of doing it. At the very least, you should be paying attention to when it's dead and to make sure that you're in XP range. That's at least the bare minimum, right? So when he draws the creep aggro or the lane back, well, just like we showed, the issue is that he lets the creeps go all the way to here. So when we pull up where his range creep is, it's within tower range. So now he's not going to be able to aggro to his range creep the way I did to deny it off without pulling it into tower, which is effectively not going to work because the melee creeps are going to die so fast, right? So then, even though he's got the lane in front of his tower, Anti-Mage did the same thing. So because he did not deny his range creep, and he also didn't do any tricks where he drew aggro this way to make these creeps last a little bit longer, make them die a little bit slower, since Anti-Mage kept the creeps outside of his tower range, this move is not actually going to do anything because the opponent carry effectively negated it. You basically have to aggro and kill off your own range creep better than the opponent. That's what the entire minigame is. So in my game, I kept my creeps alive longer than the opponent carry. But in this case, since it's the exact same, the lane is just going to resume exactly where it was to start. So making sure you use little cheap aggro tricks to move the creeps over here and keep them alive longer, and ensuring that your range creep stays outside of tower range so that you can deny it off, are absolutely essential to making this work. And if we proceed to watch the rest of this lane, he tried time and time again without doing these two important things. So we want to note that if the range creep's inside our tower range, we can't keep it there. And we also want to note that if there's too many enemy creeps at any point, that the lane will push into our tower and thus we cannot keep it there. So I'm noticing that a lot of people are paying attention when I do these replay analyses and I'm trying to teach this, but people are missing the fundamentals that make this trick effectively not work. So I hope that this video will help all of you do exactly what I'm showing you here, and also as safe laners to know that as long as you keep your creeps alive as long as the offlaner, like you saw here, then you can counter this play. It basically becomes a little mini game of creep aggro and lane equilibrium manipulation, where if one player does it better than the other, they get the lane right in front of their tower. Thanks for watching, guys. Like, comment, subscribe. Hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Bye-bye.